Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Young Leaders Are Readers Book Club. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Take just a moment and share your broadcast so that everybody know we're live. If you have not guessed, I am not Lewis Pollard, but I am Denisha. I've been with you all the last couple of weeks, but today in the Right Reverend stead, I'm filling in for him today. So take a moment and just let everybody know on your page that it's time to join the Young Leaders Are Readers book club. We've been reading the new Jim Crow, and we're so excited to dive in further in this reading. Hopefully you all have been enjoying the book as much as I have in my reread. Again, take a moment, share this broadcast, let all your friends, family know it's time to go a little bit further in our knowledge. It was Juneteenth this weekend. Yesterday, we've been celebrating all week leading up, definitely celebrating. And today, as we continue our freedom, we're going to talk about ways to continue being free in our minds. And knowledge is definitely the way to do that. So take a moment and grab your book, get your water, share this video. We want to honor our visionary, Elder Mark Moore, with the Young Leaders Conference, as well as YLC TV. If you've not already done so, make sure that you are joining and you follow the YLC TV YouTube page. In just a moment, we're going to bring on our sister Adelia. We have some wonderful things planned for our conversation today. But before we bring her on, make sure, again, share to all of your platforms. If you're like me, I have a couple different pages. So share the video on all of your social media extensions and let's go deeper. So let's welcome back to the show, Miss Adelia. We're going to welcome her today.
Hey.
How are you feeling today?
Look, trying to hold on to the energy from yesterday.
I know that's right. I'm so excited about today. So again, share the page. Pastor Pollard will be back here with us next week. But today, you got your sisters, you got your homegirls. I was laughing. I said last week I had all my Black Power stuff on. Today I went back to Brazil. I had to slide on, through the. But we're all sisters and brothers, right?
I love it. It's beautiful.
Thank you. So again, welcome to all of our viewers, our young leaders all over the world. Make sure that you use the chat. We love to hear from you. Put those comments in there. We'll be paying attention to those. And in our production crew, we'll be making sure that we are able to address or acknowledge any questions that you all have today. But we're so excited that you're here. Let us know where you're tuning in from. As you're joining in, let us know where you're from. We know that we have young leaders all over the world, that the body of Christ is all over the world. And we want to know where you're watching from today. Again, we honor our leader, Elder Mark Moore, and we honor our book club facilitator, Elder Lewis, in his absence today. And we're glad that we got to hang out with you all this afternoon.
Okay.
So let's dive right in. You ready, sis?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
So as we have been diving further in the book, and as I've gone back, because I was reading one, I stopped to go back and just refresh and revisit this. What have some of the feelings you've been experiencing been, or some of the things that you have encountered as you've been reading these last couple chapters?
So particularly with chapter 2, it has resonated, to be honest, home. It's hit home because some of these things that they talked about, oh God, in chapter 2, has hit some of my family members. It has hit friends that I know. Talking about mandatory minimals, talking about these traffic stops that are disguised as traffic stops, turning into something else. So for me, it hit home. And I know we'll delve deeper, but one particular incident with these no-knock warrants really resonated with me, and it just reminded me we have so much work to do, and I think we're done asking to sit at anybody's table. Scoot over, we're here, and because evidently I don't know. It's kind of frustrating because it's like, who is in the room doing the checks and balances? So that's kind of where I've been reading this week.
Have you noticed like any frustration or resentment or anything like that in your reading?
Yeah, frustration, definitely. Resentment, yes. And it makes you think. I mean, can you even educate our people out of this?
Right.
I mean, it made me ask that question. Is there enough books that we can read? Is there enough degrees that we can get to get us, out of this system that was just so well eloquently put together and so strategic? So yeah, resentment definitely, frustration definitely, anger definitely. And some of it lies in, okay, so what do we do? Like, what do I do? And I think a lot of people are probably asking that question.
Yeah. And as we keep talking about this, make sure that you're hitting that share button and let
Yes,
us know what you're thinking and feeling. But for me, something I noticed this week was a tension between what we know as people of faith, love and charity and anger. And I'm like, I don't want to love nobody right now.
you know.
I don't want to pray. I don't want to pray for my enemies right now. Like I'm struggling. I found myself saying that to the Lord a lot. How much I was struggling with being angry, and also like, okay, if I'm not going to be angry, then that means I'm not going to read today, or I'm not going to look at the news today, because I feel like every time I dive back into a part of this book, it just brings up that anger again at the injustice. So I felt real tight this week. I felt like, oh, I'm glad we had Juneteenth, because it gave us an outlet, right?
Yeah, I was just about to say that. I think yesterday really loosened up the reins a bit. So but I definitely understand where you're coming from. That's fair. That's a fair, like, hey, God, I'm in my feelings right now.
And where do you think the line is between like in our feelings and what the Bible would speak about, like righteous indignation?
Say that one more time.
Like, where do you think the line is between being, in our feelings and what the Bible would speak about regarding like righteous indignation? Like, what's okay to be? Like, where's the line of,
I think that because I wear the hat of social worker professionally.
Okay.
And I think wearing that hat has taught me that it is okay to feel. I think that's important. It's important to allow yourself that space and that opportunity to feel. That's what I equate therapy as. Therapy is that safe space and opportunity to process what you didn't have a chance to process.
Right.
So I think that line is God wouldn't have put some of the things that he put in his word if he didn't know that we were going to get angry, if he didn't know that we weren't going to have these emotions. But we as believers, at least if you're eating eating meat and not drinking milk, you have to know how to regulate those feelings and emotions. And you have to know how to deal with your feelings and emotions. I'm not saying don't have them, because it's important to allow yourself to have them. However, making sure that it doesn't cross that boundary line where now I've developed hatred in my heart towards a whole race of people, or I've developed some sort of resentment towards a white police officer that truly is trying to help this system that he knows, isn't so much favorable for us. So I think is allowing ourselves to have those emotions, and then praying, to be honest, the strength of God to not allow this to fester or turn into something more sinister.
Absolutely. And as you spoke about it, I think it's a good point for us to put a plug in there for therapy, right? Having a space where we can go and deal with this. And I don't know about y'all, but I've seen, and as a provider, I know during coronavirus, there a lot of insurances and a lot of platforms are offering free therapy. So you've never wanted to go, if you wanted to go before and didn't have the resources or didn't know how to get connected with all the things that we're dealing with in our world, now is a great time, especially when it's free, when people are providing this at a low cost or no cost. Now is a great time, because looking at the news, reading books, whatever, as James Baldwin said, if you're going to be it was James Baldwin that said, if you're going to be aware as a Black person, it probably means you will always be enraged. So making sure that we have not only our place of worship, our connection to faith to deal with our emotions, but making sure we have safe spaces to deal with our emotions.
Definitely.
There were times reading, I could feel it literally in my body. I was having like a visceral. Like I could feel the tightness in my stomach and the tightness in my neck, and I could just feel that, and having to really balance that with like, okay, Lord, help me with this, because I don't want to walk around in my heart, and I want to be clear, but knowing that this is our reality has caused some emotions for me. Anybody who feels comfortable, go ahead and put in the chat. What are some of the emotions that you felt while you have been experiencing this journey of information? But share with us what you've been experiencing. So as we go a little bit deeper, what epiphanies or revelations did you have in our reading this week?
Ooh. One of the epiphanies that I actually because I tore these margins up. You hear me? All types of highlights and notes. Just really getting my raw thoughts down. Because I want them to be raw. I want them to be the initial thought. Because when I go back and I read through the margins, I'm like, were you really feeling that way? But the truth of the matter is that yeah. But one of the epiphanies that I got was how this system really breaks up and dismantles the family unit. I know as a people of color, we're stereotyped with not having our fathers in the home. Our parents being on drugs. There are a lot of stereotypes I think that come along with just being a person of color. And when you look at these types of systems, I'm not saying that people shouldn't be accountable for the actions that they take, but what I am saying is that it's hard when you have a system that it's almost like you're intentionally breaking up our families here and dismantling our families, because like with these mandatory minimals and things of that nature, you're taking men out of their households, is jeopardizing the identity of their children, is jeopardizing the protection of their women. So I mean, it mimics a lot of slavery. So that was just one of the many epiphanies that I've gotten, and just how another note that I made was just the legalization of marijuana now.
Oh, come on and talk about it.
How now you're monetizing on it, and so now all of a sudden it's not that big of a deal,
right?
Or so it seems. And it really struck me that now that you started this whole system as far as the war on drugs, and all of this skewed data, now is so ingrained in the police departments that now it's almost become a norm. And it made me think about, and I know we can go spiritual with this as well, but it made me think about what sinister or perverse things have we allowed that have now just become normal because they systemically made their way into our lifestyles, if that makes sense.
So we didn't see it as evil when it first started, and so now it seems regular and normal now that it's happening.
Right.
Yeah. I think when I was reading back and reflecting this week, some of the things I thought about was just like, and it's still working today.
Yes.
It's still happening today, because as our author, is such a astute historian and outlines dates and how many times it says like 1855, 1865. And in my mind, I kept reading 1965. I was not even kind of realizing that she was not talking about 20 years ago.
Right.
Talking about what was happening in the 1800s after slavery was over. And even to think about how appropriate Juneteenth is. And we've been seeing those t-shirts that say like free-ish.
Right.
I saw a post that basically said, all the stats of what's happened over these last couple of weeks, like Breonna Taylor's officers still not being arrested, one of George Floyd's killers being out on bail, different things. It said, this is why we keep saying free-ish.
Right.
And I was like, wow, that's a very powerful thing to realize, that as much as we would love to say things are different, it's really not that different. It just has a different name. It has a different, cover up. I see some of our readers have talked about that this book opened up their ideas to the reality of the systemic racism and really seeing all the things that are covertly done. And see that when the scales fall off, if you will, I think that's what has brought some of that, because we see how we have fallen into it.
Yes, definitely so. definitely. So I think that's a really good point. I think it triggers sometimes emotions that may have lied dormant.
Mm-hmm.
Things that we saw that we didn't want to believe.
Mm-hmm.
Like we can't possibly believe in living in this society.
Right.
And you're right to the historical aspect of it. Reading it is like, okay, no, this happened like yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing how over 100 years we're dealing with the same system.
Mm-hmm.
And it does make one pause and say, I'm thankful for all of the work that has been done up until now.
Right.
But evidently, we need to become an expert on systems because it's systems that break down systems.
Right.
So it's like how do we do that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because that historical piece is almost like you couldn't possibly be talking about over 100 years ago or even 50 years ago. Like this is last week.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of, last week, did you see in the news this week where the Republican Party put forth the police reform bill, and there were a couple of people, some of them same color melanin as us, who said systemic racism doesn't exist. Did you notice? Did you see that this week in the news?
I did. I did. I did. No, I'm trying to choose my words carefully because
Okay.
I definitely want to, of course, respect the platform that we're on. However, what I will say is I think it's amazing. It doesn't matter how much evidence is in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, are you just choosing
Right.
to believe that is one thing going on versus another? And I question that mindset. I question that mindset of what is it that's making you believe that racism isn't an issue, or racism, doesn't. Did we make this up, like in our minds, or it? And I'm beginning to think that that's I don't know, that's a part of trauma or some sort of mental diagnosis.
Well, it's interesting because even reading through this book, when that particular uh, African American Republican was making this statement, he also went on to say how he'd been pulled over by police 10 times this year. So one of the things I thought of when I was listening, I said, "Yep, they haven't read the new Jim Crow. If these people are saying that racism doesn't exist, and as our author is so eloquently highlighting and pointing out all of the ways that structural and systemic racism exists and is woven into the fabric of America, then you are choosing not to see."
Oh yeah,
it's not that we made it up, which is the concept of gaslighting, right?
Yes.
You until your experience is not what you're experiencing. No, that's not what they mean. They didn't deny you because you were black. No, they didn't tell you. But really looking at how much of this exists.
Yes. And it makes me think that, it makes me feel like we're in an abusive relationship with America.
Absolutely.
It feels like we're in a domestic violence abuse with America, with America right now. Like, you hurt me, you hurt me, you hurt me. And then you come and say that my hurt isn't even valid because I hurt you because I love you.
Right. Oh,
what?
Oh, okay. Let's go there. You heard this week that racism and slavery was probably better turned as a white blessing.
Oh, it was a blessing, girl. You didn't know?
I learned today. I learned this week that that it was a blessing. What are your thoughts about that? Because we've been talking about the importance of the body of Christ understanding systemic racism. I know our leader Lewis has been challenging our white evangelical brothers and sisters to really look at how racism is impacting the lives of the kingdom citizens today. And then one of the leaders this week said that it was not so much the white privilege, but it's the white blessing. And it's the blessing that all of us now can live the life that we have.
And the first thought that came to mind was the great white hope.
Okay.
That's what came to mind to me. And I thought to myself, didn't he hear himself? And then I said, well, let me hear the whole interview because, grace, mercy. Let me hear everything before I just pounce, right? And so even after hearing the whole interview, to be honest, I felt bad for him in the sense of you just don't get it. There's no way that you could possibly get it for you to make the comment that you made. And for you to not correct the comment that you made. He didn't go back and say, I mean, you went back after the flag. What I would have appreciated is after you heard the response to your statement, then you would have went back in that very moment and dealt with it. And to be quite honest, I'm okay with the delayed apology because now your apology is warped. I don't know what's the intent behind your apology at this point. Is it because you really felt how you felt and now you're catching backlash for it? Or is that how you feel? I'd much rather know how you truly feel. You know what I mean?
Right.
So for me, it was just like, okay, you couldn't clearly get it because you wouldn't have made a statement like that because what you said was what I heard is what I heard was we should be blessed that we have you to stand in the gap for us. And last I checked, the only person that loves me enough to stand in the gap for me and all of my foolishness and crazy ways is Jesus Christ himself. And you don't have that power.
Right.
And so I don't know, it was kind of it was I don't know, it sounded very arrogant in a way. But what did you think about it?
Well, as I say my thoughts, just remind all of our watchers right now, share this on your page, keep inviting people to the conversation today. What I was watching was, you're better than I did because I didn't even go back to watch the whole contextual interview because I even bring myself to that. But what I did think about it was this reality that people who don't have the lived experience can see the value in it, but they don't see the pain in it. And if it is that you think you're the great white hope, or if it is you think that you're able to help us, then really help us.
Right.
Use your power, use your voice, use your agency to actually make a difference. However, if you don't think anything's wrong, then you're not going. It's kind of like when you tell somebody clean up the kitchen and they only, do part of it because that's the only part that they thought was dirty. Like, you're not doing us a favor. You're not helping us really. If you think that we should be grateful to you, or if you think that there's something that you contribute, then really contribute in a meaningful way.
Right.
But because it's not a problem for a lot of people, they keep asking us why we have a problem.
And the fact that you don't see it as a problem is a problem.
Is the problem. Absolutely. The fact that you don't see what you said as a problem. And that's what the book is talking about, right? In the age of blindness, right? Not having to see it, not having to look at it. And so since I don't see what it really is, then the reality of me actually addressing it would be a case because I don't see a problem. I don't see color. I see crime. And that was the deception. That was the plot all along, was not to see color, but to see crime. And I think specifically in chapter 2, she really walks through how the system worked. And I too, as a person who I started my career working in corrections, and I love correctional work.
Wow.
As well as having individuals in my family who have been part of the system, but to really look at it and see it for what it is heart-wrenching. Like, to understand this system and how our people are constantly caught up in it in ways that are so beyond I made a bad choice or I didn't follow the law, but actually impacting their life for the rest of their life.
Yes, for the entire rest of their lives. And some of the things that she discussed, like for instance with these mandatory minimals and like seizing property and things of that nature, and the grant funding and things of that nature that came in to divert the police department's focus and attention on what was really happening in their communities. It just really made me it made me think how it made me think that all of our reparations is caught up in that federal funding.
Listen,
You can run that. You can run all that money back.
that tank is mine and y'all driving.
All this money y'all funneled into an imaginary issue.
I asked Lewis this week, I said, do you understand now why people are saying defund the police? Because that's what I cried this last week and a half, defund the police. And I think as she highlights in these chapters, how much money was diverted to this imaginary war, just like we've seen in other cases, but definitely not nearly as long. Even the Iraq war, the Afghanistan war after 9/11 didn't last this long. They didn't put this much money into trying to find Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden, but look how much money has been put in this imaginary war on drugs, which essentially is a war on Black people.
Right. Let's call it what it really is.
Call it what it really is. Something that she said in the beginning of this chapter that I found myself quoting to someone else who's an avid Law and Order fan.
Yeah.
TV really makes us think the system works, what it's actually like, and how opposite that experience is for people. Would you talk about some of that material that she covered?
I think it goes back to what we talked about last week as far as controlling the narrative. We don't own the stations. We don't own the media. Thank God somebody that has some sense owns YLC TV.
Right.
But when you look at something like that, is they're controlling the narrative, and you can people can say what they want, but I think there's science that backs up when you're continuously seeing an image, you're continuously seeing something on television. That's why we have to monitor our ear gates and our ear gates and our eye gates, because what we take in, it will start resonating with it, and you'll start hearing yourself say certain things. Oh, well, what about on Law and Order when? Or what about on First 48 when? And it's like, those things are images and graphics that they want us to see that doesn't speak to the real problem.
Or the real people.
Right, or the real people. But this whole stop and frisk situation, like with the traffic laws, or stopping people for like with the cases on the buses and the trains, and just stopping people and asking them, informing it in the form of a question. Okay, how many of us are even, especially at this point, could even say no to the police, or feel comfortable, feeling like we won't walk away with our lives if we say no? It's like you form it in the form of, you ask me to search me in the form of a question, but it's also very intimidating.
As if I really have a choice.
Why ask me? Don't ask me then. I'm sorry, I thought my ringer was off. But don't ask me. I'd rather you just violate my Fourth Amendment and just do what it is that you want to do.
Which you're going to do anyway, right?
You're going to do anyway, right?
He points that out in such a wonderful way in this chapter, where it made me think back to when Colin Kaepernick first started his little go through, and he started the Know Your Rights campaign. And how many of us don't really know what our rights are. And when she was talking about that in the book, that we actually do have the right to decline a search. But we really feel like we have the right. And I would remember reading through some of these things in this chapter thinking, I didn't remember that. I didn't know that. And I actually started to reflect on times that I have gotten pulled over from and the way I responded. Here I am. My shirt right now even says fearless. Very fearless, very assertive, and sometimes aggressive. But in that moment, realizing or feeling so powerless and so helpless that as he's shining the light in my car, and I remember thinking, you ain't gonna find nothing back there but shoes, knowing that he was doing something that I didn't have to allow him to do, but not feeling like I had the opportunity or the right to refuse. And I could see my house, and I kept just saying, I just got to get home. I just want to get home. And that's maybe the third time in my life I've been pulled over. But when they talk about how many times in a year people get pulled over, how many stops make on that, I can't imagine having that experience over and over and over and not feeling terrorized each time.
Yeah, and it's reoccurring trauma.
Mm-hmm.
I actually had a recent incident where I was supporting someone that was running for public office,
Mm-hmm.
and and I got pulled over by a police officer, and I was kind of shocked at myself
Mm-hmm.
what I was thinking. The police officer walked up to my car. He hit the person I was supporting, the sticker or the magnet that was on my car. He kind of banged it, kind of tapped it a bit, and
Mm-hmm.
then he walked up to me and said, "Do you live in this county?" Why is that the first question?
Mm-hmm.
And so in my head, I'm thinking, okay, if this goes left for whatever reason, what is it that I need to do to get to the people that can make the decisions in this county, to
Mm-hmm.
make sure that I'm not sitting, to make sure that I'm not, to make sure nothing goes wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was sad that I had to even, kind of think like that. And you're right. We say that we're fearless, and we say, okay, I'm not scared, but I can't lie and say that the way that officer was talking to me,
Mm-hmm.
the way that he approached my car, the
Mm-hmm.
questions that he asked, and the things that he alluded to, because of probably number one, who I was supporting,
Mm-hmm.
and probably number two, I didn't combat with him.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point, I stared at his name tag, and he said, "Why don't you just ask me my name?" And I know it was divine intervention, because he walked to his car to run whatever, my license or whatever. And he comes running back. He darn near throws my license into the car. And he says, "You're lucky." And he leaves. And he like speeds off.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like, if we were making traffic stops like that,
Mm-hmm.
then how in the world? That's traumatic,
Yeah.
Denisha.
Yes.
And like you said, if it happens over and over and over again, how do you expect us not to be scared? Or how do you expect us to exert our rights and to say that it's the Fourth Amendment, or call our lawyer friends on the phone and say, "I just need you on the phone just in case this goes left"?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it can be disheartening.
Yes, and even some of our viewers are sharing in the comments that they would not feel comfortable declining.
Mm-hmm.
I saw it again this week. It wasn't the first time I saw it, but I think it's had a revitalization. The app that you can put on your phone to say, "Siri, I'm being pulled over," and just
Wow.
in that reality, if you looked at anything about that app, that how it will turn off all of your other apps, call someone that you have identified, start your camera, all these different things to help make sure that you can be secured in this exchange with the police. And
Yeah,
the reality that we have to live in a time like that is scary,
it
because
is.
now, we have apps about, video games and Snapchat filters and the dog ears, but they're creating apps. If they're creating apps that show how much of a problem this is, why are we not creating laws that talk about addressing this problem? So some developer somewhere in Silicon Valley, or maybe down the street, I don't know, identify this is a problem. So
Yeah.
let's create an app. But we don't have enough legislation and enough people who are elected officials making
Mm-hmm.
change because this is a problem.
Right. Right. And I know we talked a little bit about those laws, and the laws that are being written that are making some of these things that are happening, just they're not ethical. These aren't ethical things that are taking place. So
Mhm.
like, for instance, police officers not being arrested, or if they are arrested, they're not convicted,
Mhm.
is really based a lot on these laws being legal,
Mhm.
with no moral or ethical standard whatsoever.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
I,
so it makes, go ahead, go ahead.
I was gonna say I don't want to rush into other chapters of the book, but she really highlights how ingrained the system is in upholding these unethical practices. So
And that,
before,
yeah.
I was gonna say, before we go into this next kind of curve in our conversation, make sure that you're sharing this, invite your friends to the conversation, because this is too important for us to miss. Because this week alone, we've seen the Supreme Court do some really substantial and bold things. So share as we get into this next part of the conversation, right? So this week there were two major Supreme Court rulings. One about upholding the Dreamers Act, or the DACA bill that President Obama instituted, that would prevent people who were children of immigrants from being sent home or being deported. And then the other was about making sure that members of the LGBT community cannot be discriminated against. I read a horrible story about a person who was transgendered who was in a car accident, and when the fire department and 911 got there to begin working on them, when they started, cutting through the clothing and they realized that the person was transgender, they actually stopped serving them and the person ended up dying. So, that reform bill definitely protects human rights and making sure that people have fair treatment, can't be discriminated against or fired from their jobs and things like that. And people celebrate that reality of human rights, right? So whether that's the human right of someone who is not American born, or their parents aren't American born, or people who belong to the LGBT community. And my question has been, so how is it that the Supreme Court can rule for those two opportunities and still not deal with the racial challenges in our country? What do you think about that?
I don't think that we can put logic where there is none.
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, like that story that you shared, that deals with the humanity of a person.
Yes.
Period. First of all, my concern is, why are we even revisiting this?
Mm-hmm.
Why is this even a question?
Mm-hmm.
The fact that we should treat people as though they're human.
Mm-hmm.
And I think all of it encompasses humanity.
Right.
I think that's the common thread between racism. That's the common thread between these two legislations that were dealt with the Supreme Court. All of it has to do with humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And why do we have to justify who should be treated as human and who shouldn't?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's almost as if the pecking order, for lack of a better word, is continually spelled out in front of us.
Yeah.
Right? So to your question about why should we still be having to question this, even that condescending response of all lives matter.
Right.
So why do we have to keep saying that Black lives matter? If all lives matter, I saw a post, somebody had a sign that said, if all lives matter, then why aren't you more upset?
Thank you.
So as we were reading through, these chapters, and she's highlighting from beginning to end where the Supreme Court has supported the system, right? Chapter 2 is about the lockdown and what it looks like from start to finish of a person entering and engaging in the legal system. When people have tried to appeal, or people have tried to sue for discrimination, or they've tried to some otherwise go against what the court said, the Supreme Court always upholds these racial injustices.
Yeah.
So if all lives matter, whether those are LGBTQ lives or they're immigrant lives, why do we still see this challenge within the communities of color, namely Black and brown communities?
Right.
I don't know what page it is, as I'm reading on my Kindle, but one of the quotes that Michelle says in the book is, nothing has contributed more to the systematic mass incarceration of people of color in the United States than the war on drugs.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's where mass incarceration is getting its fuel from, or its sources from, and the Supreme Court can try all of these other things and keep revisiting other areas, why not this one?
Right. Why not this fight? And now it's like you're picking and choosing.
Yes. So with that in mind, I'm left to only believe that this is what you think is supposed to be the case.
Right.
All that other stuff, no, that should never have even been. So we're going to turn that out. But this one, is the way it's supposed to be. This is a white blessing.
You said what? Like white blessing?
Blessing.
Yeah, the white blessing. Oh, how blessed we are. And you know, and I don't laugh because it's funny, because none of this is funny at all. But it's almost like a lack of common sense, if you will, and total disregard. For how do you disregard an entire people? And some of these comments, such as white blessing, tells me that your interaction with us, your engagement with us, your level of intimacy with us is very limited. Because I just refuse to believe that you can be ingrained in a friendship or a relationship with a person of color and you not be outraged, because the first thing you should be thinking about is that happened. Okay, this is my friend that this is happening to. This is my somebody that I'm close with. This is happening to. And so what that tells me is you all, and I'm not generalizing everybody, but you understand what I'm saying. Your interaction with us is very limited. Intentionally, I would think.
Well, it's interesting because in this chapter, she highlights the profiling classes and the profiling criteria that cops or officers are trained in. And it's no specific demographic. There's no specific identifier. And as she said, anyone for any reason can be stopped. Whether you're driving too cautiously or too recklessly, you're driving too slow or too fast, you have a car that looks like a drug dealer, or you got a rental car. Like, it's just that reality of their freedom or at their discretion. But because of the implicit bias, likely to stop
us.
Right. So, I found myself really wrestling with that knowledge this week and thinking back to, again, my days as a person who supported individuals who were felony offenders. And sometimes I would think like, man, you're lying. That didn't happen that way. But the reality is, like, it really did. And I got to the point where I would ask them, I'm like, so let me guess, this is what you said to get this treatment program versus to go to prison. And it got to the point where I could predict how they learned to manipulate the system. So they go to prison. So they wanted to come to our facility and they would say, oh, I smoked a little bit of weed, but just, I laced it a little bit with marijuana. Because they knew that the war on drugs, even though they didn't have that language, was absolutely intended to move them to prison and Caucasian and other people to a treatment facility.
Right.
So you never smoked crack, you never did that. And they're like, oh. But they knew how the system worked.
They learned the rules of the game.
Correct. And so when we say things like the system is broken, and that reality is it's not broken at all. We just have not learned how to play the game. Now, again, I'm not advocating that anybody lie and sell drugs and nothing like that.
Right, of course not.
What we learned was that there was another way to try and get the better end of the deal than the worst end of the deal. And I think, again, in this chapter, it's so eloquently laid out. I mean, if we can read this chapter and see it and people don't see it, I think, again, it's by choice. People don't want to see it.
Oh, and you know what? And if they're having a problem seeing it, they do need to read this. They really do. And it's interesting because I actually made a note about training before I got to that part.
Okay.
And I said, okay, are they trained? Like specifically on how to strategically get these people rounded up?
Yep.
And sure enough, when I got further along into the chapter, they are. Like, you are trained and you're backed and you're justified in your actions.
Yeah, because of qualified immunity.
Qualified immunity.
And that's the reality of what we're facing even right now in 2020. As people are continuing, and rightfully so, to lift up their voices and to protest about, for example, Breonna Taylor's killers not being arrested, and other people have not yet served any type of consequence for their actions. The reality is, because we don't know about qualified immunity, and because we don't know how the systemic practices are well protected, we're going to be angry still, because we're going to keep marching, we're going to keep protesting, and nothing is going to change.
Right.
Why do you think that is, that nothing's going to change?
Why do we keep marching and protesting if nothing's going to change? I think if you knock on the door long enough, something will.
Okay.
Because even though we're dealing with this system, and this is the I guess the optimistic side of things. Even though we're dealing with these systems, we know that these systems, and we're aware of these systems. As long as we continue to educate ourselves, I think we have to also acknowledge the fact that, thankfully, the people that are attributing to these systems, y'all learn something. You know, it's not the same as it was 100 years ago. However, we still have further to go. And what I mean by that is, thankfully, we don't have to have a U.S. Marshal at 6 years old escort us into a school, being, with all this venom being spewed at us. And I think one of those examples was when quote unquote Karen approached a young lady and ended up receiving a different response than is typically they're used to. I mean, she was slapped for your interaction there. But I say all of that to say that we're definitely in a different era. Why march? Why protest? Why do what we can? We need to make noise. Yeah. And we need to, and the best way, I think, to deal with the enemy, because we have to also acknowledge that we're dealing with spiritual matters. These are spiritual, systems. The enemy works strategically. And so if he's working strategically, we need to work strategically. And we have to infiltrate the system and then come in and dismantle these things. And even with that, we have to understand that there are struggles, because further into the chapter, she talks about how judges retired because giving these mandatory minimals was messing with them. Yeah. And their consciousness and their personal morals and values. So even if we don't see the fruit of the marches, even if we don't see the fruit of the the writing our legislators, even if we don't see the fruit of that right now, Martin Luther King unfortunately did not see that fruit. Moses didn't even see it, the promised land. So we have to be mindful that what we do now, it reminds me of the butterfly effect. Are you familiar with that concept? Just real briefly, the butterfly effect is literally the flutter of a butterfly's wings can affect and cause a tsunami on the other side of the world. So basically, whatever it is that you do right now in this very moment matters. It may not matter today. It may not even matter 20 years from now, but you can't let up, because 100 years from now, it will be different. And it can be better. So that's what I would say to what seems like we're fighting a fight that we can't lose. I mean, a fight that we can't win, but I think we can. I mean, I see it right away, but
right. And I asked that question to be provocative in some of an extent, but what you're talking about, I think, leads me to another thing I wanted to make sure we cover today is what we're doing matters, and the marching is important, but there's some other steps that we need to take that have a greater effect. So, for example, this week in New York, and I know we've got people from New York watching, we've got people in Ohio, Atlanta, New Orleans, from what I can gather, and other people. Go ahead and please share where you're watching from. But I know this week alone is the New York primary, and I know because of coronavirus, a lot of primaries have been happening over the last couple of weeks and will continue to happen. It is so important for us to not only vote, but to not only to protest and to march, but we need to vote, because the public defender or the attorney general, the prosecutor, the chief of police, those are all elected officials. Our mayors, our representatives, our senators, those are all publicly elected officials and or appointed officials. And based
Right.
on these systems, because looking like you were talking about the judges who retired, right? The judges who didn't want to do this anymore. Judges are appointed and elected officials. If
Correct.
we're not holding our interests at heart, we have the power to remove those individuals. And it's so important to know what the platforms of people who are running, what they and how do they benefit us.
Right.
The other thing I want to make sure that we highlight is the census. It is so important. And I checked today, because of coronavirus, the census has been extended to October 31st.
Wow. See?
So if you received your census card in the mail, or if you got an email about it, please, please, please fill out your census.
Yes.
Because that's how we get representation. Depending on, how many people are in a certain area, that's how they decide things that actually impact us. And I know there's fear sometimes around the census, especially for people who maybe are undocumented or don't understand their rights as an inhabitant of America. We
Right.
think that that's not something that pertains to us, but it absolutely pertains to us. We started out having this conversation talking about how we know of people who have been affected by mass incarceration, right?
Yeah.
So know how many of our people are affected by these laws, that we have the power to actually not only march, but cause some movement, because we hire essentially the mayor. We elect those people. And if we sit back and just march or keep getting angry, not enough will change. And what could be changed in 10 years might actually take 100 years.
Yeah. And I definitely agree with those sentiments. I think part of it is making sure that we know that we're empowered. Making sure that they understand. And sometimes I think we deal with things at surface level. So we have to explain to our people, listen, you have power and authority. And you have to exercise it. And this is what exercising it looks like. Without being scared, without being fearful or anything like that. I think we have tools. I think there are so many of us that are so discouraged that we don't utilize the tools that we have to empower ourselves.
Right. And even as people of faith, I always think about how much the faith community was at the foundation of the civil rights movement. And back into the end of slavery, how much the faith community, whether the abolitionists that were Quakers and other people of faith who realized that their connection to Christ, their connection to God, would not allow this evil to continue on. And then, even though we were singing Free at Last or We Shall Overcome, the church was pivotal in the civil rights movement. And if we're going to see change in 2020, the church, young leaders, we have to step up and really the change. I saw a little post about millennials that said, I'm so glad to see millennials leading this charge. Said y'all have scared eating them Tide Pods, but we love how you turned out, right? So our young leaders here, whether you're a millennial or you're a seasoned person who's lending your wisdom to this community, we have the power. We have not only our God-given authority and our anointing, but we also have creativity and ingenuity and the will. The Bible says he called the old because they knew the way, but the young because they were strong. Let's use our strength and also learn from our leaders and our those who have gone before us who know the way, and actually make something change, because that's what we can do as people of faith, people of God who are leaders. What are we doing to lead this charge? And like I said, it takes us as a church to make sure that we're encouraging people to participate in their civic duty, to make sure that we're holding space even in a faith community for learning. Do you know your rights? Do you know what you can and cannot do? Do we understand what we have just as a human? Because a lot of times I think we want to go with the authority of Christ.
You're right.
The police don't really care about the authority of Christ
at all, especially not in the
Constitution, but they might blink a little bit more at the Constitution, right? So making sure that we're educating ourselves, not only on the Bible, but on the Bill of Rights, not only on Christianity, but also on the Constitution. Do we know what we need to know? Because it's only hurting us when we don't know.
Yeah. As you were talking, a thought that came to mind, which she talked about later on in the chapter, which I think the prison label.
Mm-hmm.
As you were talking, and you talked about how important it is for the church to step up, which I do think that we have to insert ourselves in certain matters. I mean, we just have to, because that's our stand as believers of Christ. And actually, Jesus was the ultimate social justice warrior. Everything just wasn't all nice, some things resorted to turning tables. So so when I look at the prison label, us as a church, and we talk about empowerment, we talk about late numbers, we talk about, well, you know what, we can't be so quick to judge the person that does have a felony. We can't be so quick to put a label on them without hearing their story, because like you said, after so many times you start hearing the story, you can now predict what the story is going to be. And I think that sometimes we produce our own labels in church, whatever, and we don't allow the opportunity for that person with that label to come and feel comfortable enough to know what is it that they can do, because that's a whole nother set of numbers and power that we can put behind a movement. If we can get past the sitting on a pew next to somebody saying, well, they just got out of jail and they served 20 years.
Right.
Okay, let's delve a little bit deeper.
And we did something because we gave them an outfit and a couple, pair of shoes to help them with their reentry. And if the statistics are true of how many African American, particularly men, are incarcerated, and we've been talking a lot over the last couple of weeks about the Black church, that also lets us know what the statistic of Black men in our churches are that are probably carrying that label, right?
There we go.
So if it's not even just advocating because it was my son, advocating because it's your son, advocating
right.
These are people who are part of our faith community, our family of believers, and these are the challenges and barriers that they're facing.
Right.
Because they're part of us.
Yeah. And they're a part of our community, and that's how we have to see ourselves back. I think back to that village mentality, because if I don't sit and talk to your son, just like I'm sitting and talking to my son, then your son could possibly be the son that's going to end up serving 20 years for knocking me over.
Correct.
And taking from me. But it's deeper than that. He's not taking from me just because he want to take from me. He's probably taking from me because his family's hungry. So let me just ask your mama if y'all need food. You understand how all of that unravels?
Yeah.
So
yeah. As a faith community can continue to show up for those, because even when it comes to evangelism is not just standing outside giving water and having hot dogs and passing out tracts. How do we make it easier for people to come to Christ, right? And one of our leaders, Pastor Tim Finley, who has been a wonderful addition to the YLC conference. He has been leading the charge in Louisville, and just watching the comments on his page of unbelievers who are saying, "Wow, he's a pastor, y'all. Where's his church? I'm going to his church." Right?
That's right. So,
watching what he's doing in the community, not out preaching Jesus, but in this moment preaching justice, which is still the message of Jesus.
Right.
He has been drawing people to Christ because they're watching him take to the streets to address an issue that touches them. Because a lot of times we're good with dropping off book bags back to school. We're good at free haircuts, and that's wonderful because that's needed.
Yeah, but definitely.
The church challenges the system that actually makes the book bags needed, that makes the haircuts needed. Now we are actually moving in the wave of Christ.
Now that's good. I like that.
Wow, we out of time. We out of time. So again, shout out to all of you all who joined us today. Hopefully you enjoyed this conversation. Our brother Lewis will be back with us next week. Next week, we're in chapter 3, which is the color of justice. It's a good one. Get ready. Brace yourself, but journey on. If you're like me, when you kind of feel that aversion to look away, keep staring straight at it, because we're going to get through it. And that's the way that we can make changes, to keep empowering ourselves. One of the things I always tell people is arm yourself with information, Make
Yes.
sure that you have your weapon of truth, not only just our spiritual armor, but even our intellectual armor is powerful, because the more we know, the more we can make change. So Adelia, I'm so glad that we got to spend time together today.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Enjoyed you. Again, to our host, Elder Moore, we're grateful that you have shared
Thank you so
your
much.
platform with us. We hope we did you proud today. And to all of our viewers, to all of our joiners, invite someone. I got a message from one of my friends last week. She said, I bought the book. I'm going to join the club. So make sure that you're sharing this with people that you know. We want to continue to gather a community of not only just believers, but people who are thinkers, right? As one of my
Yeah.
old pastors used to say, we don't want to be dancing dummies. We want to
Ah,
be people
come
who
on.
are armed with the spirit, armed with faith, and armed with truth and knowledge. So share this with other people. Let them know there's a wonderful book club that's meeting, that we're going through truth. We're informing ourselves, and we'll see you guys here next Saturday at 1. Have an awesome weekend. And it's still Juneteenth, so celebrate. We love
That's right.
you.
Love you all. Take care.